Our first speaker is going to be Dr. Vivian Siegel, who is her topic is coaching authors to publish better papers in better journals. Now, I think that should be of interest to everybody here, is how do we work with those authors, because without them, we got nothing. Okay.
Hi, and thank you for having me. Okay, so let me start by telling you a little bit about myself, for those of you who don't know me. I'm a biomedical researcher by training, and I think we'll take a foray into biomedical research for the next couple of talks in the session. And I left active research to be an editor at the journal Cell, then launched Public Library of Science as its founding executive director, and at some point decided I wanted to get back into academia. And when I did that, it was really, my personal goal, which was to take the experiences I had both as a researcher publishing my own research and as a professional editor, assessing research and deciding what to publish in pretty high-profile places. How could I help academics and promote their research in a way that was more productive for me than simply rejecting 90% of everything I saw? And so at some point, my family decided to move to Nashville, and I approached Vanderbilt about the idea of taking my experiences and bringing them into academia. And my goal was really to try to help people write papers more clearly and powerfully, but also to tell them a little bit about how editors look at papers and how reviewers look at papers so that they could develop a kind of publishing strategy. And I'll talk about that in some detail in my talk. I also am pretty ideological by nature, and I want to improve editorial practice and do that both by mentoring editors at Vanderbilt, but also by doing some research on editorial practice. I am a faculty member at Vanderbilt, and we do have a bit of a research enterprise going on. And because of who I am and what I've been, I do like to think about the future and prepare our faculty for the future of communication. You'll hear a lot more about the future, I think, when Rebecca speaks towards the end of this session. But most of my work is really involved with what's the current practice today and how do we help our faculty do that better. And so when I came to Vanderbilt, I was recruited because my chairman was becoming the editor-in-chief of his society's journal and wanted somebody like me to help him. But he encouraged me to think about what I wanted to do, and I came to my recruitment interview with the idea for the project that I'm doing, which is to create a center for science communication at the medical center. And the idea of the center was to teach students and trainees and faculty about the process of writing research papers and publishing well, to guide editors who are interested in taking editorial roles at their society's journals and help them do that well, to offer some mentorship to students who might want to take editorial jobs in the future. And so we have a center, and I'll tell you a little bit about how we got started. It takes part of my time. Actually, I spend a lot of my time still as a professional editor in the sense that I bring in editorial contracts that pay quite a bit of my salary. But I have an assistant in the center who does a lot of hands-on teaching and workshops with me. And we've just started almost everything. I show you the site here because just about everything that we have and have done is available on this site and is publicly accessible. Old PowerPoint presentations that I've given, and you're welcome to go look at them and use them. There's some sample letters to send to editors, things like that. The only part that we have that isn't available to everyone is we just started an online writing training, and that's only available to Vanderbilt for now. Okay, so the goal of the center is to help our authors publish better papers in better journals, and I just thought I should define my terms here. And in one part of that is really thinking about publishing as an important part of what I call the research flywheel. When I was a biomedical researcher working on flies, I worked on flies that were sterile, and I used to say, in evolutionary terms, if you don't reproduce as an organism, you might as well be dead. I think the same thing is true for research. If you do research and you never communicate it to anyone else, nobody else can work on it, benefit from it in one way or the other, and build on it, then you might as well have never done that research itself. So we want the work that we do to have impact in both, on the outside world. And Dr. Clement gave some great justification for why that's part of a university's mission. So we want our papers to have impact in terms of affecting what people do and how they might build on them. And we want our papers to be published in places that themselves are considered to have stronger impact, and that comes to that horrible term, the impact factor, which I won't talk about at all, but I think we have used citation metrics as a surrogate for impact, probably more than we need to, and certainly the focus of Better Papers and Better Journals is about getting our work visible and used, and one surrogate of how well that's used is whether other people use it, cite it, and therefore we do citation analysis for the university, for the medical center in particular, to see how our papers are doing. So we got started, I actually started the project of helping people write and thinking about publishing strategy when I was on this short sabbatical in San Francisco, where I developed a course which was 4 lectures long and 3 workshops through the Office of Career and Professional Development at UCSF. And I mention them because this is, through that course, they actually developed a lot of writing training that they take all the students and postdocs through at UCSF. We've shared our materials so much that it's hard to identify the source anymore, and I don't mind whether I'm attributed or not, and neither do the people who are doing this at UCSF. So it's been a kind of living collaboration, and we are certainly open to having other people kind of use our materials, develop our materials, and give back materials we might use in the future. But at Vanderbilt, I started as a faculty member. I had some editorial projects to do, and I started just by doing individual seminars, but grand rounds and department sessions about how to write a biomedical research paper, how editors look at papers, and how you might use that information to think about how to submit papers and interact with editors. There was also an editors club that had already been formed at Vanderbilt before I got there, which is a group of graduate students and postdocs who volunteer their time to copy edit the work of Vanderbilt faculty and Vanderbilt researchers as a whole. And so they will work on anything you want them to do for free, and I mentor them and guide them in things like how a manuscript is actually written, and the difference between writing for helping people rewrite for clarity and coherence, as opposed to kind of getting them to write in your own particular style, so keeping the author's voice and that sort of thing. And that's really the only kind of copy editing work I do within the university, is through this volunteer organization of trainees. I started off very quickly doing one-on-one consulting with faculty, people who'd gotten want to send their paper off to Nature, want a jaded editor's perspective on whether I think it might fly there and whether the story's good, people who have had decision letters and want me to look over the reviews and editors' decisions to think about whether they have a chance of resubmission. And through that have developed a group of people who really like having me on campus. The other groups that had already existed that I engaged with pretty quickly are professional development programs of various kinds, postdocs, junior faculty. There's an organization called Women on Track, so pre-tenure women faculty, and they've developed a whole set of programming around helping people with these, what they consider essential career skills, grant writing, manuscript writing, publishing strategy. And we do some longer term projects which we started independently at the center, things we call manuscript sprints. We bring in 12 to 24 people who are in the process of writing their papers and have them use a kind of peer review process, guided feedback, to get their papers through a project deadline and to improve them through revision, two rounds of revision during the sprint. We have things called manuscript studios, which are focused on papers destined or hopefully destined for high-profile journals. I actually triage those. If I think they don't have a chance at all of getting into a reasonably high-profile place, we won't actually take them through a studio. But if we do, we actually engage both experts in the field to think about what reviewers might tell them about the paper, and then also talk about narrative, the story that's being told, and how that story influences its ultimate kind of level of interest. And I'll talk about that in some detail with the rest of my time. And there's also another group on campus called the Writing Studio, which really helps all members of Vanderbilt, though they're focused on undergraduates, with writing projects. So they do one-on-one consulting for 50-minute sessions for free for anyone on campus. We teach basic writing skills. We also talk about particular writing projects and what people expect to see when they read something in that kind of project, and we do a lot of strategy. So I go around and I give this talk called getting published in a high-profile journal, and I do this around the world, actually. And this is the summary slide that I give people. Of course, to get published, you want work that has impact, and I don't offer much advice on that, although I would say an editor's perspective when at a journal like Nature or Cell or the New England Journal, Science, will say, let's assume the best of all possible worlds. The conclusions are justified by the data. The interpretations are reasonable. Is this interesting? And I think that kind of perspective of thinking, being an optimist first and thinking about the research that you're doing and saying, am I interested in the best possible result I can get, is not an invalid way of thinking about research. Write bigger papers, and I think that's really about sort of trying to tell a story that is interesting to as large a group as possible, kind of write well, write strategically, and that's kind of Psych 101, I call it, kind of figuring out what people are expecting from different parts of a paper and kind of managing those expectations, anticipating how reviewers behave and guiding those requests, and interacting with the editor in such a way that they become an advocate, both with respect to your initial submission, but also in terms of interacting through the decision and revision process. So the rest of what I have are just the kinds of things we talk about. If you will find yourself working with authors and you want to think about these too, I encourage you to do so. When is it time to write a paper? When do you have enough data? What story do those data tell, and how do you describe where it might lead? And so in clinical research, quite often that study design is set at the very beginning. It has to be to do a clinical research project. But in basic research, in the biological sciences, what you have is data. You have information you didn't have before. You know something you didn't have before. And I think about it like a game of Jeopardy. So you have an answer. What's the question? And how simple is that question? And when I teach manuscript writing, and I won't go into this in any detail, I talk about how in at least in most papers of somewhat general interest, you have two kinds of audiences, and your gatekeepers, the people who decide whether to publish your paper, actually sit in those two audiences. So you have the people who work on your very same research you do, and they're going to look at areas of the paper that are really designed for specialists. And then you have everybody else, and editors fall into that everybody else category. And they don't know your work as well as you do. You hope that's true. And they're actually looking for you to teach them. And so that part of the paper has to be written for them. And that's really the body of the paper. And so that's the kind of main message that I do in manuscript writing. But when you think about it in terms of manuscript publishing, you need to anticipate what reviewers need and what editors need based on how you look at a paper when it's in your own field of study, and how you look at a paper as an outsider. I'm trying to understand how interesting it is. So editors need to know what's new, why should I care about it? And when I was first at Cell, I worked for Ben Lewin, and he used to very aggressively say on the telephone to anyone who called him, what's new, in a way that was terrifying. But I understand why you need to ask that question. And that's really what authors need to get an answer to for them somewhere in the paper or the cover letter to help the editors understand why they should become advocates for that paper. And so most teachers of technical writing talk about the introduction of a paper as a kind of funnel shape, where what you get at the end of the funnel is a question, and then the kind of end of the introduction is how you're going to approach that question, what you're going to do to answer it, and the answer these days. And that nature of that question is really important. So when I do writing workshops, short writing workshops, what I generally work with trainees is getting them to define that question and to say it in a way that everyone in the room can understand it. And so the question is, how simple is that question? So, I don't know, I'm wearing a sweater that's kind of bluish purple. Let's say we call it blue. So, we're all going to call it the same color. Do we all actually see the same color? Is a kind of question I asked myself when I was about 6 years old. I didn't know any neuroscience at the time, and I know that if I could answer that question, I could publish that in Science, because it's a question that you don't need to be sophisticated to understand. And so when we talk with junior faculty about when they write papers, we say, okay, what's that question that's going to go at the end of your introduction? And how much work would it take to make it a simpler question? And if the answer is I can get to a simpler question in a weekend's worth of work, then do that work. If it's going to take 5 years, then maybe you just need to find the journal for which that readership finds that question interesting. Okay, and did you answer the question? So the biggest mistake I see in papers as an editor is that people put into the introduction questions they don't answer in their paper. And if you do that, you are asking for trouble. and that's something we tend to look for when we do guided feedback. That's one of the main things I have people look for. Okay. Reviewers these days always ask for more. We talked about peer review and how important it is. Rebecca's heard me on the subject of peer review, questioning whether it does what we expect it to do, at least in this journal context. But at least in biomedical research, you're almost never told to publish as is or with textual modifications. There's usually a set of experiments they want, and I now advise people to think about that before they submit, and you can guide reviewers to asking for what you want to give them by how you write the discussion. Okay, it's really jaded, awful stuff that I teach people, but it's important to know. Okay, now revising the paper, here's another expectation management. So a lot of people I know will look at the decision and say, well, I can do 30% of this. The other 70% I either don't think is appropriate or I can't do. I've already tried it and it doesn't work. Let's just do what we can and then submit the paper and explain why we didn't do the rest. Well, that's a huge mistake from my perspective, because as an editor, when I get a revised paper, I expect, unless somebody told me otherwise, that when I open it, we'll have answered everything I asked for. And so if you're not going to do everything, my strong advice to you as an author and to anyone you work with is to talk to the editor far before you submit. Actually, a good fraction of the time, if you ask the editor, independent of submission, they'll say, yeah, that was too much to ask for. And when they get the revised paper, they'll be fine with it being out, not being in the paper. But when they get it at revision, they're going to be so disappointed by it not being there, they will reject the paper, that exact same paper, because of disappointment. So that's kind of basic expectation management. You can't fight your reviewers and editors and tell them they're stupid. You need to assume that they worked hard, they know what they're doing, and you just need to be polite. And if they're asking for an experiment that's already there, maybe you didn't put it in a way that you didn't realize how important it was for people to see those data and bring it closer to the front of your discussion in the results section. And just be respectful. If you criticize somebody, they will dig in their heels. And if you decide to appeal, you really need to be talking about the research and not about the number of years it took and whether it's going to affect whether you're going to get promoted or somebody's going to get a job. And appeals, all editors who function ethically need to listen to, have appeals as part of their process. But they need to be thinking about it from the scientific perspective. And you need to interact with the editor not as somebody who's blocking your way from something you want to have happen, but as a colleague, and they will respond to you that way. Some papers do get rejected, and I encourage anyone when they submit a paper to another journal to have thought through the comments of the reviewers. Even if they're not going to do additional experiments, there are things that will improve their papers, and they may get those reviewers again. And there's a whole strategic issue around whether you're going to tell a journal you've been somewhere else first that I can't get into, but it is something we talk about a lot. And then there's reputation. And so there's lots of ways to do review in the biomedical sciences. We tend to do it where the authors are known to the reviewers aren't known to the authors, and there are lots of other ways to do review, and other fields are different. I do think people tend to be relatively open-minded about someone who's new to a field. They don't get the positive reputation of having been in a big lab that they were just in as a postdoc, but they are somewhat open-minded. But once you start publishing, then your reputation will precede you, good or bad. So I encourage people to build good reputations. And that works with editors too. Although editors try to just publish the best research, we are all human, and we are influenced by our interactions that we've had in the past, and we're influenced by where you've published in the past. So if you're submitting your best work to my journal, and I consider it best, when something comes across my desk that I don't quite understand, I might think, but everything else I've gotten from you has turned out to be so important that I must be missing something. If it's the other way around, and something looks really good, but every time something good has been published by you, it's been in another journal, I'll be equally kind of perplexed by it coming across my desk. So I think there is that kind of reputational building that you do with journal editors, which also includes kind of the enjoyment of working with you and how helpful you are as a reviewer. And those are things worth thinking about as you're a trainee or just starting a career as a researcher. My main point is that if you treat editors as colleagues, you interact with them, you talk about them as work, you respect their opinions and get them to respect yours. If you treat them that way, they will become advocates for you eventually, and that it's worth your while to do that. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a kind of unusual beast, having come back into academia from having been an editor, although Rebecca's in academia also, having been in publishing for a while. So I asked myself, can other people do what I do? Well, not everyone has my set of experiences, and I think you can. I think the real issue is bringing both insider and outsider perspectives to assessing research papers. And we all know about using experts in the peer review process, but I think equally well we need to think about outside perspectives, really saying, have they made their argument forcefully, even though I don't understand the material? And I think that's true in the humanities as much as it's true in the sciences. And actually my favorite reader at Vanderbilt is an English professor, and I read for him as well. So, and the issues that insiders answer are conclusions justified by the research, and what are the obvious next steps, and are they doing it by state-of-the-art methodologies and so on. Outsiders can think about the narrative much more effectively and think about, whether there are other more interesting stories that could be told from those same data. And to do that and get good information that helps you submit a better paper and increase your chances of being published in a better journal, you need to create an environment in which the authors themselves are really welcoming of that kind of critical open feedback. And it's one of the challenges I've seen at Vanderbilt, which is such a nice place. People are always so, everyone's so glad you're there all the time that it's really hard sometimes to say, I don't believe that those data could lead you to that conclusion, or didn't we already know this from this body of 90 other experiments you mentioned in the introduction? And we have to be able to build and encourage that kind of open feedback. And so the manuscript studios I run I warn people at the beginning they're going to be anarchic, and they're going to be harsh and vibrant, and they have to be interested in having that to kind of go through a studio process. But most people love it at the end of the day. We live by collaborating, and this is really all I have to say. I mentioned the Office of Career and Professional Development at UCSF. We work internally with Faculty Affairs, Biomedical Research, Education and Training, and the Writing Studio, and we're really welcome and open to any other kinds of collaborations that any of you might kind of be interested in. I travel around and do workshops almost everywhere. So that's what I wanted to say. Oh, and I wanted to mention this website one more time, just to say that, once again, that you can get a lot of this kind of material, the sample cover letters, pre-submission inquiries that we hand people, research articles that we think are interesting and valuable, all on the website, which you can just, if you just type in Center for Science Communication on Google, you'll get to it. I think it's the first link now, finally. So thank you.
Cindy Clark from the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, is going to tell you a little bit about their perspective. We've just heard about working from an editor-author kind of collaboration. Cindy's going to address a little bit more about the library and where the library fits in terms of this kind of collaboration. So we thought this would be a nice little natural progression in terms of thinking about editorial roles.
Thank you, Joanna. All right. Good morning, everybody. I am a biomedical librarian, and I've been with the National Institutes of Health Library for more than 9 years. When I first came on with the library staff, I was hired to do reference work, our traditional type of work, which is conducting literature searches, citation verification, doing a little bit of instruction, but also I came in to help them revitalize their brand and to take the library through a new branding process. What I wanted to tell you before I start really is that I do work for a government entity, and I have to disclaim that anything that I talk about today does not necessarily constitute endorsement by the National Institutes of Health, the NIH Library. I'm not trying to give bias to any particular product or service, but you'll hear me talk about a few different products. All right, the state we're in. So I have a question for you. What do Thomas L. Friedman and E.O. Wilson have to do with libraries? Many of you are probably very familiar with these two authors, and the answer is, in Thomas Friedman's recent book, Hot, Flat, and Crowded, he was writing about the new global warming situation, how our societies are growing in numbers, we're becoming overcrowded, taking a lot of resources. And in there he was talking about species extinction. That got my attention because I like biology and that's my area of interest. But also he was quoting E.O. Wilson, who is another of my favorite authors. And E.O. Wilson was saying for a species to survive, we really need to have them be resilient or adaptable. And I'm saying that libraries today, and specifically those of us who have careers as librarians, we need to be resilient. We need to adapt in order to survive. Now, at the NIH Library, we've recently introduced a writing center. It's about 2 years old now, and I'll go into more detail as I go through the slides. It really comprises 4 parts, and that is a virtual site, which people can get to from all over the world. It is hopefully reaching out to our more than 18,000 employees at the NIH who are out on the West Coast. They're in Montana, they're down in Research Park in North Carolina, and they do travel extensively, so they need access to the resources, and we've given them some resources having to do with writing and publishing from our website. So we have a specific web pages that are devoted to a writing center. We also have a very, very small physical writing center, and that's on the lower level of our library, and that's for NIH staff. You see the door, that's the entrance to it. There are a few more books on the shelves now. We've grown since this picture was taken. We implemented an editing service, which I'll talk about quite a bit, and we're going into the next phase, which is introducing our writing training program. The Virtual Writing Center, as I said, is accessible 24 hours a day. It provides links to resources. We also have provided an email link so that people can write at the top, request editing service from our staff. And then we're still working on our FAQs. That's something that's coming up in our next meeting in 2 weeks. And that, by the way, that website is open to all of you. It's publicly accessible. Any subscription journals or online books that are not licensed for public access will be behind the firewall. Now, in the physical space, which is on the lower level, we only have 3 study carrels, but we have a laptop chair. We have laptops that are at the information desk that people can check out. We have a printer set up, and we keep growing the collection. Right now it's at over 80 volumes. On our website, we also have access to the online catalog, and you can look up keyword writing and get more than 265 hits. If you see the red circle here at the bottom left, that tells you, at least for Writing Center books in this particular book, the location has in the call number NIH Live Books, so someone would, or NIH Live Writing Center, so they would know that that is on the shelf down in the Writing Center. Also, it is set up in the catalog that somebody could do a location search and search for any books that are just in the Writing Center. Now, who's involved in this Writing Center on our staff? And this is what I really am here to talk to you about today. We're talking about new roles for librarians as editorial consultants. So I want to take you through how we came to the situation we're in today, how we're growing the program, and what it means for all of you, whether you're a librarian or a publisher. We have a core group of librarians. Right now there are 5 of us who were trained as professional librarians, and we have had additional training to become editors. So we are the core go-to people. We take requests that come in, we send them out on a rotational basis, and those core people get them. Once the more work comes in within a week than we can handle, we go out to an additional probably 12 librarians who are also taught and trained in editorial work. We've had instructors come in and teach all of us scientific editing. Many of us have English backgrounds as our bachelor's program. Some are either editors currently or have been editors of journals in the past. So as the librarian editor, we will take researchers when they walk in the door. If they're saying, I want to publish a systematic review, we will give them an article that says, here's how you do a systematic review, and thanks to all of you who have published this kind of work, we appreciate your writing. We will also follow them through to publication, and I will talk a little bit more about that. We also have librarians on staff who are called informationists. And the informationists are librarians or chemists or bioinformatics staff, physics people who have gone on and specialized. And they usually work with specific institutes around NIH. And as editors, they usually get their requests coming in from their groups when they're doing rounds in the hospital, or when they're sitting through journal clubs, or when they're doing presentation and trainings to different groups like oncology or epidemiology, or also neuroscience. So we have a PhD in neuroscience and other in nutrition. So they are also now getting involved in systematic reviews. A group of us went out to Pittsburgh. They have a systematic review training program at the University of Pittsburgh. It's very well put together. And even though we've been doing systematic reviews for a while now, we came back with new techniques that will help us in our work. So we are co-authoring, many of us now, or at times we're being acknowledged in the papers for the work we're doing. Now, I was saying that as librarians we have to worry about perishing, you know, if we don't adapt. And what's happened over the years, we used to get much more requests, many more requests for literature searches, many more requests for reference question answers at the reference desk. We no longer sit at the reference desk. We've triaged our service. Reference assistants are now sitting there, and they take the walk-up questions. They will help with the basics of, here's how you find the database, here's how you find that journal, here, let's get you the PDF, you're on your way. We also support, through our reference assistants, uploading documents to PubMed Central, because we're now mandated at the NIH to submit our work to the PubMed Central, the NIH manuscript submission system. Right. Here are a few notes that I put down to talk about the service. The reason this whole Writing Center came about is because we listened to our customers. One of our scientists came in and he let us know that it'd be really nice if all the writing resources were co-located in one place, so someone could come in who was working on a journal, could sit down, reach on the shelf, get the answer to the question. From that, we decided to start surveying our users. So we did a study, a pilot study, where we looked at the physical scientists on campus. A few of them responded to our survey. We used Survey Gold. It was online. And they told us they were publishing many manuscripts a year. Some are publishing 6 or more manuscripts a year. And that they also wanted editing support, and they wanted more training in writing scientifically. So from that, we went into having interviews, one-on-ones with several of the lab chiefs and the deputy directors around NIH. And from them, we heard that as a lab chief or as a director, I don't want to be writing a paper for my fellows or for somebody in my lab. What I want is the library to help people get a good, solid first draft, so they can then bring it back to the Institute, and the Institute can vet the science. So that's how this whole thing got started. We did additional studies. We provided editing training, trained our staff. We did a pilot study that lasted for 6 months where we took on one particular institute to see what the demand would be, what the workflow would be, what were some issues we were encountering. Now, I'm not counting all the requests that we've had in 2010, but just this year alone, so far, we had 61 requests that came in through our email listserv, and that's available from the website. And that doesn't include the phone calls that came in, or the walk-ups, or people who got repeat requests from the informationists that were on rounds with their particular groups. So that, it sounds like a small number, but it's actually much bigger than that. Right, what we're trying to do in the Writing Center, and we're still working on this, is answering what will the library do for me. This is a growing process. It doesn't happen overnight. We've only been at it for about 2 years now, and we have a lot of work to do because the demand is there, and the more work we do, the more we're learning people need our help, and that's the niche that we are trying to fill. So what we will do, we will advise our customers, we'll train them on how to use the resources, and we'll encourage them. So we're not just helping the new fellows, the postdocs, we are helping experienced researchers who have had 15 years of experience with the NIH, have published multiple manuscripts that they've gotten their work out there, and they're well known in their fields. Some of them at their later parts of their stage in their careers, what they need is just some hand-holding, some cheerleading, and we also provide that service. We had a recent really prominent scientist who retired, and before he retired, he was debating whether to publish his studies in one more time. He had updated some of the research, and the question that he brought to me is, where do I publish? Should I publish? And after several meetings, what we did is we identified potential places that would publish his work. If you've ever read Tom Calcagni's book, he talks about the importance of your work and how you have to line out your key talking points. So what we also did is we lined out what his key talking points were for his research so he could do his pitch. And he did get published. He has a monograph now, and that was a very satisfying experience. We have other researchers who are so busy helping their staff publish that their own work is sitting on the back burner, and they're getting towards the end of their career. They need to get their work out. Even though they may bring several co-authors along the ride with them, they need to get it out there. And if they're overwhelmed, they're at the top of the supervisory situation, they could use some encouragement too. So we get them on track, get them a timeline, have mark points at which they will be accountable, and try to get them through the process. In one case, I'm working with a senior scientist who wants to publish 7 articles by June of next year. We're just starting. She's done the data. She's got her data in place. She's done multiple research projects. This is a couple very famous research studies. She just needs to get it out there. So these are the kinds of things that we're doing. We found our niche. Our niche is just to get people to the solid first draft. And that means we only do light and medium editing. We don't do major revisions. We don't do heavy editing or substantive editing. We won't vet the science. As librarians, and any of you here who are librarians and you're trying to decide where is your organization going, how are you going to get past, we don't have many literature search requests anymore, how are we going to show value to the organization? Where are you going in the future? This is something to think about. And if you can find your niche, one thing to do is don't promise more than you can deliver, and don't go beyond the skill sets of your staff until the time comes when you feel you can promise more or you can deliver more. So we're very careful about what we promise. So we'll do the basic light and medium editing. And here are the people we've served. We do give out evaluation forms with every interaction that we have, every manuscript that we edit. And so we are getting the graduate students. We are getting postdocs. We're getting principal investigators as well. We have lots of visiting fellows, and English as a second language is an issue at NIH. These people amaze me, the scientists that I work with. They're so brilliant. And the fact that they can speak a second, a third, a fourth language, and when they come to our offices and they're humble about their grasp of the English language, and they're saying things like, well, my English isn't so good, I want you to just look my paper over. We're bowled away because the science is good. And what we often tell them is, if we can understand your paper as an educated lay reader, then any other scientist outside your field of expertise should also be able to understand your paper. And so that's how we come at it. We aren't the experts in the field, but we know how to look up answers in the book. We know how to read instructions for authors. We know how to use EndNote Reference Manager to put things in the proper citation style, and we can verify a lot of the information that is in their papers. Another little trick I use is, and I don't know, Vivian, if you do this as well, use PubMed to look up terms that are in the paper and see how many hits you get. Oftentimes it's a new term in the lexicon, and so you may want to check how many people are hyphenating this term, how many people are using it as two words, how many people are capitalizing it in such and such a way. Until it makes the Oxford English Dictionary, it's not official, right? That's at least that. And we've already come across a word that's not there yet, but it's being used in the mathematics. So we're partnering with people around NIH. We realize what our role is and what our skill sets are, and we try not to step on others' toes, but we try to honor and to send people to the right contacts so that they get the help they need. If we can't help them, we refer them. Other times, these groups that are listed here refer back to us, so we're helping each other out. So what are the issues? The issues at NIH are getting this publicly funded science out to the readers, getting it back out to the taxpayers. And what we want to do is make sure that our research is seen by other scientists so that it can get built on, so it can get verified, so that conversations and dialogues can get going, and our researchers learn even more and can continue to make groundbreaking discoveries. The public is a very big part of that equation. I already mentioned PubMed Central. Other issues that we deal with are journal style adherence, and we go to instructions for authors quite frequently. So if you're a publisher, if you're a society press, the biggest thing that you can do to get more journal submissions or better quality journal submissions is to revisit your instructions for authors on a frequent basis. I was at the Council of Science Editors annual meeting in Atlanta this past June, and that was a whole topic of conversation and presentations were just how can journals improve their instructions for authors. And people who had been around for quite a while were in the back of the room going, ooh, I didn't think about that. Oh, I didn't see it from the customer's viewpoint. So many times, here's one quick tip I can give you. If you've got your instructions for authors all in one long list, or you've got it in headlines where they have to click on a link and drop down to a section and go back and forth, please try to provide a PDF as well, because we often print out the whole PDF and we underline, highlight, refer back and forth, show it to the user, give it to them, and print out a new copy for us so we have it for the next person. Now, another thing that we work with is EndNote and Reference Manager style, output styles. If your journal, if your particular journal isn't an output style with one of these two software packages, I'd highly encourage you to create a style or to work with them and get one created. Grammar and punctuation, of course, is always and always will be a challenge for anybody, no matter how good a writer you are. There's always one new little writing technique that you will learn no matter how far on the path you are, whether it's what's the difference between a hyphen, an N dash, and an M dash, or when do I use that colon and that semicolon. It comes up repeatedly. What we're running into at the NIH is American and British spellings. We have a lot of visiting fellows, and many of them from India or from England or from other countries on that part of the world, write in the British English. And so the writing of the words will be slightly different with the A's and the E's and the I's and the O's and the U's. And then the punctuation. When people in America, let's just say America, look at punctuation and they see it wrong so many times, after a while they'll either question their own understanding or they'll think that's the right way. We see a lot of British single quotes, and we're getting a lot of single quotes in what should be double quotes in American submitted journal manuscripts. So this is something we're educating our users on. Now, I was asked, and I wasn't going to talk about this, but oh, thank you. All right, I'm going to run through the rest of this. So plagiarism was one of the big questions I had today, and I say something on that. Copyright too. At NIH, there was a Catalyst article published on copywriting right. It's very good. You can link to it from our website. We often hand it out, and that's an issue that we wanted to do training on. Now, when it comes to plagiarism, many of you have seen the two Nature articles this year that talked about plagiarism, and if you're a journal publisher, you know that this is an issue. One of them was in July 5th online, Journal Step Up Plagiarism Policing, and that was by Decian Butler, and it reports on journal publishers' use of cross-check. And it said that one journal reported rejecting 23% of submissions for plagiarism. Another one was Chinese journal finds 31% of submissions plagiarized, and that was in the 9th of September 2010 in Nature, and it was a correspondence piece. It's a very troubling issue. It's something that we're addressing at NIH. It's something that we want to train on. And for us, the reason it's really a very big issue is because our librarian editors are now co-authoring. We don't want to be seen as endorsing plagiarism. All right, the benefits of an editing service, if you decide to implement one, you will save the time and money of the authors, your senior people, and also the publishers that you work with. If you're on the library side of it, you will be doing some of the work for them and making sure that more submissions get accepted. You help to empower your researchers to become a better writer. You communicate the library's value, and you're getting a good return on investment from your resources and your staff. We've been marketing, we've held open houses, had stories on our website, we've added links to email newsletters, and we're doing word of mouth. And how are we measuring our success? We are measuring it by using evaluation forms, which we'll be revising, how many referrals we're receiving, listening to the feedback from our customers, doing more surveys, more research. This is an ongoing process. We're looking at the number of published papers that have come through our editing service, and we're doing a study at the moment where we're looking at our editing suggestions and seeing how many of them made it to the final published manuscript. We're just at the beginning of that, and we're now being acknowledged, so every time we're acknowledged, we consider that a success. So I want to thank you all for listening. I hope that you picked up a new tip or trick or an idea to take back to your library if you're a librarian and see Can we evolve? Should we have our staff hire more complex work? Can we move into this arena? Do we need to hire more staff to ensure that we offer this type of service? So good luck in your work and successful publishing to all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy. That was very interesting what they've been able to do there. Okay, and our last speaker, here we go, slideshow, is Rebecca Kennison from Columbia University, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the use of new digital technologies with authors. So we're moving from the editorial, from working with the authors in more traditional papers, to changing roles of librarians, as you heard from Cindy, and now thinking about the additional technologies that are out there and the new kinds of publications that authors are considering.
So I'm going to take a completely different tack than Vivian and Cindy did, and talk almost entirely about the consulting services that we provide. Within my center, and I'll talk a little bit about what we do at Columbia, we actually stay away from the editorial process as much as possible. So I admire that they're doing that work. And what we work with people on is doing a lot of advising around where to go for information, and a lot of advising about how to prepare materials that might be outside of traditional publishing as we've been looking at it. So just some research that's shown what do researchers want from libraries, and this is kind of a consolidation of lots of research. But some of the things that people have been identified as wanting from the libraries are access to publications and databases, of course, big buying. Everything should be there and I should have access to it. Conservation, data migration and preservation, metadata standards, taxonomies, ontologies. That one is crucial coming into semantic web technology. A lot of people who understand that they need to have metadata, however they conceive of that, but don't really know how to proceed in having that their publications, however they're defining that, including data sets, and I'll spend a lot of time talking about data in a minute, how that can be found and reused. The digitization of research materials, and a lot of people spend a lot of money on digitization, archiving, curation, and finally text support. And the way that we've been addressing some of those needs, again, within an academic library community, but generally has been to create information commons and to do that digitization and to look at digital projects and lots of repositories, both digital repositories and data-specific repositories. And again, I'm going to spend the majority of my talk talking about that last bullet point.